Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest Godzilla Recommends podcast. For this particular entry, it actually has to do again with regards to the comic book industry, in particular, the industry right during the huge speculator boom and then bust that occurred between the mid 90s up until the late 90s or so. In some cases, even in the early 90s is where it started on there. And the reason why I love this particular topic is because I lived through it as a young child, basically as a teen. And so for me at that time, it was nothing. It was just, oh, hey, I'm so excited about comic books. I could buy as much as I could afford at that time, which was not much at all. And so now coming up, a couple of decades later, now into past 2010 and so the 2014 era, I can look back into that era. It's almost 20 plus years ago, and see essentially what happened with a whole new perspective. That's why it's so fascinating to me, because at that time when I was like, oh gee golly, look at all these beautiful comic books, look at these X-Men, look at these Chronium covers, look at these special editions, these big mega events that are happening. I suddenly realize now that there was a huge world that was happening at that time within the comic book industry, from a revolution associated with Image to, again, the huge boom, absolutely gigantic boom that occurred with the death of Superman and the breaking of Batman's back, and then finally the spectacular bust that occurred when all the speculators, everybody who came in, left. So with this particular recommendation, I found a website called badmouth.net, and I've included a link for it below. There's a gentleman on there who goes by the mysterious name Noun, N-O-U-N. He doesn't go by any other name. He just essentially has that name on there. And he chronicles, at that time, he essentially had his own store that he ran. And this was a store that was not really like a conventional type store that you would go to on the corner of a strip mall. No, this was a roving store. In other words, he would bring his own comics that he would buy in bulk, and he would sell them at the comic book conventions at that time. And because he had a first-hand experience of the rise of the comic book industry, the spectacular boom, and then the subsequent bust associated with it, he chronicles it from start to finish. Very, very good article. Save yourself maybe about 10 to 15 minutes, because it'll take about that long to read through it, but it is absolutely a fantastic read. Again, you get everything associated with this. He talks about the early days when DC was first coming out with the upcoming, at that time, breaking of Batman's back, to talking about the rise of Image Comics, the revolutionary split that was associated with those people going and starting their own their own company and essentially becoming rock stars. He talks about the craziness, the madness that was associated with the comic book vendors, and how some places, all they sold were number ones of a particular issue. Like, in other words, they would go to the comic book convention and have boxes and boxes and boxes of just one single issue, which was the number one, because at that time the speculators all thought, I buy this comic book, I'll essentially have my college paid off in the future. That's how crazy it got. I've included a little blurb here that I'll read for you, for everybody. And again, it shows you a good preview of what this article does. Here he talks about Harbinger number 1, which I believe was a comic book from Valiant Comics, who definitely enjoyed the surge from the huge speculators that were there. This is what he said, and he's talking about a Seattle show that he attended. He said, "This was the show where I also realized the speculator market was exploding. I mentioned Harbinger number 1 earlier. After selling 2 copies at cover price to customers practically apologetic with excitement, I marked one up to $5. It was gone in minutes. As a gamble, I marked one up to $10. It was also gone in minutes. I had left my other issues at home as backstock, but during a slow point, I wandered the show to see what other dealers were selling their copies for. I saw one customer gladly plop down $25 for a copy. At future shows, I sold copies for $75 each, which is completely irrational for a new book with a multi-thousand print run. I knew it couldn't last, and it didn't, though the market took a long time to collapse. that's a preview essentially of how he writes. He writes pretty well, in fact, when it comes to this article that he made up. And he put everything under several parts. Unfortunately, the article ends kind of like at a cliffhanger. Whoever this noun is essentially didn't add anything else afterward. But what he placed on there is pretty cool stuff. This is great, fascinating stuff. Again, highly recommend it. Take a look when you have a chance. If you're a fan of the comic book industry like I am, and please check out my other podcast. My other Urban Legends videos that I have on this. I talk about one about the death of Superman. I talk about the Deathmate comics. Again, this is a particular subject that I'm really fascinated about because I missed all of it growing up, and now I get to look back and see what happened. And yet again, this is going to be another entry. So again, highly recommend it. Check out the link. If you have a chance, share it. Share it with anyone else who's a comic book fan, and you'll see the entire world that you and I missed throughout the early to the mid to the late 90s. So, alright, thanks everybody. Take care.